Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Abdul Amar, and I'd like to welcome you to today's RGD webinar, Creative Neurodivergence, Get Organized for Good. The RGD is a nonprofit, a professional association supporting the graphic design community. We hold weekly webinars that are free for all members. Please consider joining the RGD to connect with fellow designers, access resources, demonstrate your professionalism, and support the community. You can visit rgd.ca for more details. And if you haven't already, please take 10 minutes to complete the RGD's Creative Earners Salary Survey. Creative Earners is Canada's most comprehensive survey of salaries and billing practices in the creative industry. The free final report gives valuable insight into what professionals in a variety of roles and disciplines are earning. You can find the survey at creativeearners.ca. And just a quick reminder that you can submit any questions you have using the Q&A button on Zoom, and we will try to get through all of your questions at the end of the presentation. So our presenter today is Zand Griffin. I'm going to Zand to join us on screen here.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Zand. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Don't forget to drop in that chat what you're looking for today. What made you join? What are you looking for? I see that in the chat, it does say the volume feels very low. TJ, let me know if you're hearing this okay. But my name is Zand Griffin. My pronouns are she, her. I'm thrilled to have you here for this most important conversation. And before you judge my slides too harshly, remember that I am a manager of graphic designers and I understand my own limitations. Speaking of limitations, we're going to get into a lot today. Moving forward, this is a little bit about me, and you can read a little bit about myself. But as far as myself, I've managed global design teams for a Berkshire Hathaway venture called Berkadia, where I decreased launch spend by 70%. I've increased revenue by a third, managing marketing teams. I've also implemented systems that saved my team 3 years of repetitive work. And during all of that, I started to burn out. And in talking with therapists, 3 separate therapists actually, they said, maybe you should check out if you have a diagnosis of ADHD. A lot of my friends had ADHD, but I really just thought, I'm too organized. I can't have ADHD. A lot of the creatives I managed had it. And then my sister got diagnosed and I said, no, still not me. And then finally, I went and got a late stage diagnosis actually this year. So after I announced one of my first events, I started running events for the neurodivergent community. Another family member told me, and then I realized that the systems that I had built for being creative and by being so in tune with myself actually prevented me from even thinking that I could possibly be neurodivergent. When I got my diagnosis, I also started talking with other neurodivergent professionals, and not only just people with ADHD, but people with autism, with dyslexia. And I found that the systems that I use help more than just people with ADHD. So we're going to get into it today, and I'm going to go over a quick agenda, and feel free to keep dropping into that chat what you're looking for today, what you want to talk about. I'll modify my talk as we keep going through. And then any additional questions you have, you can drop that into the Q&A section as well. As far as what we're going to go over today, we're going to have a little community agreement, just so that we all are on the same page about how we're going to be talking to each other today. We're going to talk a little bit about why neuroinclusivity matters. So if you aren't neurodiverse right now and you're like you're an ally and you're looking for tips on that, we'll talk a little bit about why it's important to make your workplace neuro-inclusive. We'll go through some very specific organizational tips, and I promise you, we're going to go through a bunch really quickly. So if you are multitasking, pay attention during the organizational tips side. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about advocating for yourself. How do you talk about the things that you need in the workplace in order to be super successful? And we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So again, drop those questions in and we'll get to them. So from me to you, neurodivergence is unique to every person. Your experience and values may be different from one another. Let's keep those open minds. We want to be able to learn from one another today. So Drop your tips and the things that have worked for you in that chat. I also wanted to bring up a quote that I've referenced a lot from the Stanford Neurodiversity Project. Neurodiversity is a concept that regards individuals with differences in brain function and behavioral traits as part of normal variation in the human population. I want you to remember that. Normal variation. Neurodiversity is normal. Being on a spectrum is normal. And as we move through today, neurodivergence looks different for everyone. Not everyone believes in being diagnosed. Not everyone believes that their disabilities or even disorders, your experience might not align with someone else's, and that's okay. And this is that space for open minds, respectful learning, shared growth. And if you are excited for today, share in the chat, use those emojis as you want to. Neuroinclusivity, why it matters. And this is a quote that I found in a lot of other neurodivergent research and resources. It's estimated that 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. And one of the things that I want you to know about is that this is a composite figure. There's a report from the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics staff called Neurodiversity from the National Cancer Institute that was talking about how to help people with cancer in a neurodiverse way. This stat was based on ADHD, autism, and dyslexia, and it was just cobbled together from those in children. So one of the things that you should always look at is the research that's out there. This number is likely a lot higher than 1 in 5 people. And people like me get late diagnosed all the time. So even with children, those stats might be off. We're a huge part of this world. Welcome. But the biggest issue is that we still do not fit in. Although we're a huge part of this world, it's not built for the way that our brains process information, and workplaces in general are just not built for us. There is a huge stigma that we can't do the same work, or on the other side, that we have superpowers that can create unrealistic expectations. So there's a lot of people in this space. So one of the reasons why I wanted to start running these events is because throughout my entire career, I felt alone a lot of the time. And that shouldn't happen. There's tons of us out there. It's just finding the right people and finding those to fit in. And I do see something in the chat which says, what about someone with Tourette's? Yes, Tourette's is a neurodiverse piece that we can include there, but a lot of the research and stats don't actually include Tourette's at all. And there's not a ton of research out there. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in this space. So I wanted to bring up another great report that's written by Deloitte that brought together some research on that neuro-inclusive workplace. The gist of this is that having a diverse workplace encourages more creativity overall. Neuro-inclusion is better for everyone, but we still have a long way to go. Partly due to this perception that they brought out in this report. I'm going to read this quote to you. Some believe that the inherent characteristics of neurodiverse individuals makes them especially well suited for certain types of tasks that are repetitive in nature and do not require much social interaction, like coding or administrative functions. And this is from the perspective of some organizations that are less likely to implement a neurodiversity program. Put in that chat, do you think this is true? Do you feel like this is true? I don't believe this is necessarily true, but it can be true if you're not managing your energy effectively. And that's the whole crux of how to get organized, is to be really in tune with your own energy. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you use to keep yourself organized? Drop it into the chat. I, every year, was buying a new paper planner and saying, this is the year that I am going to be completely organized. Let me know if that's something that you are, you do, you use. Are you on paper? Are you in digital? I see people saying Notion. Notion is a great option for a digital system. Lists in my notebook every day, 100%. I see Google Tasks, Google Reminders. That's amazing. We'll talk a little bit more about tasks and reminders. Planning paper, lists, Trello. Yes, color-coded calendar and Outlook. Oh, I love that, Sierra. I'm definitely going to be talking about that as well. Oh, there's one person that says currently failing and mired in chaos. I understand, and we'll get you there. We're going to get you into a better place. But great calendars. We're going to move on a little bit. And a great point here, a mix of all, which is a little overwhelming. So one of the things I want you to know today is that you are not broken. You just need a consistent system that works for you. So let's talk a little bit about what those systems are and why we start to fail with those systems. We pick different ones, we try different things, and they don't never really stick, they never really work. One of the things that I realized, and I was high performing, finally got diagnosed with ADHD because I hit a really huge period of burnout. I realized that I was trying to force myself into this tiny neurotypical box. I said, my brain is broken. The way that I am thinking is incorrect, and I need to be able to think like everyone else. And so I would use the systems that everyone else used and just lost touch with who I am and what I need. So again, if you are multitasking, here's the section where you're going to start paying attention because organizational tips are coming fast and hard. I'm going to talk first a little bit about what managers of neurodivergent teammates can do to help each other. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about organization for individuals specifically and dive a little bit deeper into those. How do I build a system that works for my team? There's a couple of ways to do that. If you're managing neurodivergent people, here's how you're going to be able to help them. You're going to build structure, create flexible support, and predictable routines. Now, not everyone has managers that are going to want to do these things, but I'm going to go into each of them so that when you become managers, if you're not a manager at this point, you'll be able to reference back to it. Building structure, breaking tasks into subtasks. So when you're making an ask to your teammate, it's not just overall make this one pager. You're going to say, I need a one pager that has a quote from an individual in it and has a visual that has this. You're going to be as specific as possible when you're making that ask. Another thing that I find that helps my neurodivergent people that I manage, that I time block it for them. I say, I need you to spend 2 hours on this one piece, and that will help them to set the expectation of what I'm expecting from them. So those are just some tips on how to build structure into the time. And I see in the chat, yeah, Rory, 100%. Structure is so very helpful and necessary. So as much as structure as you can build into that is so important for asking for things from your team. The next part of this is flexible support. When you approach your team as being the same people, you are going to create a lot of consistency, yes, which is great, but then people might not have the same support that they need in that time. So being flexible in how you're supporting team members, creating that autonomy in the peak working hours, how do they need a flexible starting time? Can you provide that as a manager? Is really helpful because when a neurodivergent individual is managing their energy and their time, it could relate to certain working times in the day. The other piece here is collaborating with specific individuals on your team to understand what they need. One of the things as neurodivergent people, we tend to try to fit ourselves into that box of neurotypicality, and then lose sight of what we need. So having a person actually ask thoughtful and insightful questions about how you work helps someone to discover that and understand what they are needing and wanting to do. So I'll move into that predictable routine. Structure is great. So creating repeatable process, but then creating a routine about with your team. So creating consistent schedules and using agendas. If everyone made an agenda, everyone would be so much happier, and not just neurodivergent people. Creating consistent times where you can catch up with one another. So a one-on-one, if you keep that the same every other Friday, instead of constantly deprioritizing and moving it and shifting, that's also really helpful for a neurodivergent team member. The other part of this is, how do you create those clear standards for recurring tasks? When you have things that happen many times, you can start to create those procedures and have something for people to reference and turn to when they're at a point where they're stuck in the everyday work and now they need to go into a recurring task. So I see something in the chat I wanted to address real quick. I found an agenda won't work for me. Is there anything else that works for me? And Elaine, I would ask a question there, and we can go back into this in the Q&A side while you respond. But what is it about an agenda that doesn't work for you? Is it how they're writing the agenda where it's not clear, or is it that you don't like writing agendas? While you do that, I'll move on into the next section and I'll make sure to answer that in the Q&A once I hear back from you. So let's move into the individual side. How do I build a system that works for me? And this is where we're going to go into lots of individual. What can you control? It would be amazing if we all had managers that were thoughtful and kind and really wanted to build in structure, flexibility, and also consistent routines for us. But since we might not have that, let's go into what we can control. So the first thing, I want you to be very aware about how to understand yourself. How do you know yourself and look at the routines that you're doing that are working for you and what's not working for you? Let's also, because we can control this, what do we need to see and when? And I'm going to talk more in depth about how we're going to do that with actual tools as well. But the first part of this is understand yourself. Check in, tune in. When you're going throughout your day, look into yourself and say, okay, how am I feeling right now? Do I feel organized? Do I not feel organized? Do I feel like I know what's going on? And then note what's happening at that time. Why are you not feeling a certain way about the project that you're working on? Why are you feeling unmotivated at this point? And then we can talk through specifically how we can go through and prevent those feelings from happening. So in communicating needs, let's have active conversations around how your working style works. So once you understand yourself and what's good for you, what works well, let's have that conversation around what can my manager or what can my client actually bring to the table so that we can meet in the middle and create a compromise about both of our working styles. Another part of this is that identify the boundaries that you have. Where's the limit of where you will stretch to? And when you go past that, what does that mean? And we're going to talk a little bit more about boundaries moving forward. And then lastly, when you are ready to get working, so we already went through and identified what are the things we need to understand, what do we need to go through and tell people about. Now we're ready to do work. How are we going to get focused? How are we going to make sure that our working time is actually our peak working time? So looking into recurring tasks for regular breaks, because if you are constantly working or working through, even if it feels good at that time, you are going to burn out if you don't bring in that regular break time. And then also we're talking about how we're setting up our studio and our workspace for comfort and Should we introduce fidget toys? Is that something that is helpful and is a good tool for you? And then some other cool things that I've done to actually keep my brain on task. And what do these systems actually look like in reality? We talked a lot high level, like here's where we want to be, and now what do these actually look like? So I tend to use Asana, which is a project management tool. There are a lot of tools out there that can help you. I learned that once I strayed away from pen and paper only, I was able to keep my brain in a much happier and safer place by storing all of my tasks in one place. And that was something that worked really well for me, which is before I ever do any work on something, it needs to go into my project management system or my task system for having one place for doing it. You can see here, this is just a screenshot of my Asana board for a virtual series that I'm bringing for the Asana community as well. I'm bringing masterminds. And so these are a viewpoint of what's called Kanban style, which is a board view. So I know that if it is in my project management system, that I need to work on it. And if it doesn't make it to my project management system, I will never work on it. This is my external brain. So that's the first thing. Store your tasks in one place. That works for me. And if you have a brain that is as busy as mine and going 100 miles an hour, having one place to know what your daily tasks are is very helpful. And another thing I want to highlight is that Asana and other tools, so Notion also has a flip tool. I know that Trello is mostly board view. Make sure that you choose a tool that has different types of views so that you have not only this board view where you're able to move things from column to column as so you can see the status visually, but you can also flip it back to more of a task list where you have a punch card of all of the things that you need to do in order by their date, by their time. It helps you to prioritize things and be able to have something to be flexible enough to meet your brain where it is. When I am overwhelmed and cannot zoom out and see, like when I need to see the bigger picture, that's when I'm looking at my board view. When I'm tuned in and able to really chunk through my tasks as I need to, that's when I'm looking at that list view. So choose a tool that is going to give you different views easily, where you can just click a button and kind of flip through. I did see something in the chat that I wanted to address as well. Dee asked, do you put personal tasks in this tool? The answer is yes. There are a ton of different ways that you can manage your projects. And by personal tasks, if you're talking about your day-to-day, I need to take out the dog, I need to pick up milk, you can also do that too. You can just separate it into what's called a different project. Or if you're talking more about your individual tasks underneath, say, a task that takes medium effort, if you're talking about this is my part of the task versus someone else, you can do that as well. Lindsay just brought up a really cool point in here. I use Asana as well and have a column for any brain dump where anything that's not immediate but still relevant I can do and then move it once I've dealt with it. Yes, that goes back to that first point of anything that's in your brain. If you can create your external brain, it's not going to be in here anymore and you can always revisit it later. So get everything into your system as fast as you can. The other thing I just wanted to note on here was that if you have a task that takes a little bit of effort, task that takes a whole lot of effort, task that takes medium effort, we're going to talk a little bit about how you start to tag things that need a little bit more of your energy and like your attention span and how you start to chunk through those too. So we'll go into the next one, which is thinking about tasks from an energy needed perspective. A lot of us are sometimes more focused on, I know this will take me 2 hours or an hour, or maybe it's going to take me a full day to finish this task off. But what is the before and after look like when you do those tasks? Is it something that you can do 500 tasks in and then never get tired? So if it's something simple and easy that keeps you going and gives you initiative and makes you feel really good for being able to check something off and move on. Once you start thinking about things from an energy needed perspective, you can batch things together and do those types of energies together. So if you are doing a high energy task, a task that makes you feel tired, like just thinking about it before, a task that makes you feel tired once you're done, and you need to build in more of that energy regulation afterwards, start to think about your task like that. That'll help cue you into, how am I feeling after I do this thing? And once you get to that point, you can even start to change your system the way that you need it to be so that it has different tags. Maybe you're looking at it visually and seeing, oh, there's a green tag here. I can knock that out in 15 minutes. I'm going to feel good after it. My day is going to go really smoothly. Or I need to dedicate a whole section of time to this high energy task because I know it's going to take a lot of effort for me and a lot of thinking power. So start to think about things like that. And I do want you to think about, how do I get these into the system as quick as possible? There's a ton of different ways you can do that. If you're getting in tasks from people from your email, there's different systems where you can actually forward emails and then it'll create a task in your to-do list so that it's one less thing for you to worry about. It's your external brain. You can reference it anytime. There's also, if you're an in-person or really working a lot like together with people in person, you can use a mobile app and insert something really quickly into that task list that you have. Then you can start, once you become comfortable with that, you can start to look at your automation. So how do you use if this and that, Zapier? What's a way I need to automate to get, if I get an email that says form, like something specific, I can just automatically get that forwarded into my system. There are tons of lovely ways to get them in. So we're going to move more into what tasks you're doing and how do you start to break that down into subtasks. So every time that you look at a bigger project, the energy that you have to expend to start to think about the different pieces of it is time that you're wasting and that you don't have to worry about after you do this type of project once. So this is just an example of how I put together one of my events. So this is more of a task list punch card of the subtasks I need to do to get an event out the door. And then once I have this done once, I can actually just copy this template and then be able to utilize that in the future and go faster because my brain's already used to how everything is working together. So this will really make you faster over time. And Andrea, I'm so glad you said that. They say, I have a bad time blindness, so thinking of tasks in terms of required energy really helps. Yeah, so firstly, anytime you're thinking about how much time it will take you, multiply it by 2 because it's going to take you at least double the amount of time. And also, once you start to think of it as required energy, you're going to see the true time it takes because you're going to need that time before to start thinking about it, the time after to start to be able to regulate yourself to come back to a state where you're able to start doing more impactful work again. So I'm glad you called that out, Andrea. So communicating needs, this is a little way that I like to be able, so once I know myself, once I know my system of how I like to work, how I incorporate work, Then I'm going to look at communicating that out to the people around me. So whether this is clients, this is your manager, these are your coworkers, these are requesters from internally. How do I like to receive feedback? What are the things that energize me? This is a little bit over, but my ideal working space looks like, my quirks are, what's the time that you like to work? Do you like to get a ton of emails, or would you rather talk in person? So you can create a how to work with me guide and then share it with people so that they understand how you like to work. Alternatively, and what you should also do is ask others about their working styles. How do they like to work? And it'll actually encourage people to be more open about how they like to work, and it creates really great communication overall. You'll then remember, okay, she actually likes to hear feedback actually in email, because when I talk to her on the phone, it actually she can't catch all of it. So she prefers to receive feedback via email. Or I love to be able to do work that is more creative, and I like to be involved from the beginning of a project. So I like to communicate to that the people that think they're saving me time by keeping me off of meetings, because I actually really do enjoy that part of my job. So once you start to do this and have these conversations and formalize it and document it down, it really creates a more open and honest environment. And this is more about getting focused in your space. So once you've communicated your boundaries and what you're looking to do and how you like to get feedback and how you like to work together, and you've already set up your systems, let's look at how we can focus our space and get it in a place where we can start to really get work out the door quickly. So one of the things for me is that I struggle with transitions. So going from different types of tasks, so going from a high energy task into a low energy task is really hard for me, and then vice versa. So I actually like to color code my calendar so that I actually see where my conversations are happening and where I need to transition. So if I visually see it, I can mentally prepare for it. So looking at this calendar, like I have a hyper focus block where I just really want to like get something done. And then I take a break, even if my brain does not want to, because I know I'll be able to come back much stronger. And then I personally like to go into something that's a little bit lighter. So being able to host a webinar is like a medium effort tool for me. And then going to the doctor is super high energy for me. So being able to have those recoveries, have those breaks, and start to visualize it in my actual calendar is really helpful for me. Another thing I would love, love, love to show you about and start to think about is how do I change my physical environment to actually set me up for success? One thing I have really enjoyed is being able to have a visual timer, and you can see that little picture there. But a visual timer for me has been a game changer, because now I understand visually how much time I have left. And so I can actually see it more, because I also do have a time blindness as well. So when I create that visual, it helps me to connect, okay, I have a whole half of an hour, or I have a quarter of an hour, and it's visual and not just arbitrary numbers. So the other thing that I've incorporated into my everyday is that I change my physical environment to remind me to do things. So one of the things I struggled with a lot was getting into bed on time. I'm a night owl. I love to be able to stay up all night, and I'm really energized at night. But then if I have early morning meetings, if I have early morning things I need to accomplish, or doctor's appointments or anything like that, I struggled a lot. So what I ended up doing in my house is I changed out my light bulbs for these colored LED bulbs that you can schedule. And every night at 9 o'clock, all of the bulbs in my house, or the 4 that I have on, will turn red. And they'll identify to me visually, oh, it's 9 o'clock. I need to start getting ready to go to bed. And then being able to, at 10 o'clock, the lights turn off completely and then tell me, okay, you're done with that time. Being able to see that has gotten me into a habit of saying, okay, here's how I'm going to handle the rest of my night. You can take this concept further by actually changing your work desk lamp to say, okay, every day at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, whenever you need a little bit of a break, it's gonna change the light and it's gonna remind me, yes, I need to get up, I need to recharge, I need to get out, touch grass, look at the light. And Erin has a really good question, was how do you make yourself respect the color changing lights? And I agree, I'd probably just ignore them because it's not about being perfect all the time. It's about finding what works for you and testing. These two tools have worked for me with the visual timer, with the visual light changing. Those have worked for me, but I've tried a million other things. It's all about figuring out what works for you and then seeing the benefit of actually respecting that. So when I see the benefit of the habit that I've built by going to bed and feeling good about the day that I've had, it works for me. But you're gonna have to test and you're gonna have to see the different things. I've tried a million other things. So these are what's worked for me, but definitely trying new things is really important. So we were talking a little bit about the recurring breaks. This is just another reminder. You can set up your system to actually have recurring breaks set up in it. You can build into, like for Asana, it's a recurring task that you can actually set and have in your punch list task. So it'll be created once you, like every time you check it off, it'll be auto created again for the next day at 5 p.m. or whenever you need your break to be. Yeah, Asana is free to use. It does have a free premium model as well. So there's some tasks in there that you can't actually do without paying for it. But this type of task, I think you might have to have a premium, but you can automate this through If This Then That or Zapier. Once you start to figure out what you need, then you can make the system work for you. And I want to move a little bit out of this organizational task, and I want to talk more about advocating for yourself at work. Okay, you figured out what you need to be successful. You figured out the best ways for you to communicate that to people. You've identified that there's actually some things that your manager needs to help you with, or you need to have more flexibility in certain things. And it doesn't seem like they're willing to do that. So I want to ask everyone here, have you ever asked for accommodations at work? Have you ever disclosed your status to ask for accommodations? Have you ever needed anything like that? How has it gone? Has it gone well? Has it not gone well for you? That's great. I see some people have. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I have, and it's not gone well. I think I'm nervous too. And yes, I have in the past. Those are all incredibly relatable. It is so hard for us to actually admit that our brain works in a different way, and we might need a different way of working. And the working environment is not set up for you and to do that. One of the recommendations I do is, one of the things I've noticed when working with people is that we do tend to over-explain. Neurodivergent people in general tend to over-explain. And one of the things that I saw is that you don't necessarily need to disclose your status to ask for accommodations. You can tell people up front. That's definitely something that's what I've gone through is I do tell people and disclose now that I have a formal diagnosis. I do disclose, and I want to champion and have more people and more representation talking about this because I want to normalize it. But there are some spaces where you might not be safe to share that information, and you might have a livelihood that's threatened by that. So don't necessarily think that you need to disclose the status to ask for accommodations. And it's all about how you present something. Another thing, at the start of a meeting, if you are uncomfortable with looking at the camera, you can actually say it. If you start to work in certain things about how you work, it sets expectations and people respect that. At the start of a meeting, I specifically say sometimes if I'm not looking at the camera, it doesn't mean I'm not paying attention. I'm actually taking some notes over here, or I actually start at the start of a meeting. I use a tool that helps keep me focused. You may see it occasionally on camera, and that could be your fidget toy that you're playing with. It actually keeps me more focused and I will pay more attention to you because of that. Admitting something like that actually does help create a vulnerability where people start to see the real you. And if you take small little steps towards that, they will feel more comfortable and share more with you as well. The other type of thing that I was thinking of was for agendas. If you want someone to actually send an agenda with a meeting invite, you can tell them or send an email to them to say, hey, to better prepare myself for this meeting, can you provide an agenda? You don't necessarily need to say anything else about it. You can just say, I'm gonna help you to have a better meeting by you telling me what you need to happen in this meeting. Or another way you can do that is I am most in tune with my body, and I wouldn't say with my body, but I am in tune with my energy. I am most productive at the start of the morning. Would you be open to having an alternate start time for my day? I would rather start at 6 a.m. instead of 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. How do you choose to do that is going to be your choice. And if you do want to disclose status, that is definitely something you should talk with HR about. If you are looking for something where you've started these small things and you've seen with your manager, with clients, however you're engaging with people, you can definitely start to build that conversation. But if you see that there is something that you are needing, like 1 day a week remote, or something that's a little bit more challenging and your manager is just not receptive to it, that's a possibility where you can go and you can get that documented with HR and start that conversation. But as far as our time today, I've finished up with a lot of the conversation that I wanted to start, but I want to leave lots of time for Q&A because I see that in that chat, people are talking back and forth, and I'm so excited about that. Let's go into the first question. We got some questions that we received earlier. Abdul, would you tell me those questions again and remind me of those?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. So the first question is, how difficult is it to promote your work as a neurodivergent designer?
Yeah, this is a great question. The question is, how do I promote my work as a neurodivergent designer? And I guess the question I have back for this is, are you disclosing that you are neurodivergent? Is that part of your branding? Or are you just wanting to set expectations around the type of working style that you're doing? I'm going to assume that part of the branding of your work is that you're neurodivergent. And to do that, you have to be careful about how you're setting up things, because there's a perception out there that, like we were talking about earlier, that neurodivergent people are only good at repetitive tasks, or they're not good at social interactions, which when you're working with a client, you need to be really good at creative tasks that aren't repetitive a lot of the times, and then also be really social and engaging with them. So the way that I approach that is really talking about, for myself, I am a very organized director of marketing. I'm a marketing leader. I do say that I am ADHD, but I also talk about the systems that I have in place that help me to be super highly successful. So if you are going to be disclosing I'm neurodivergent, talk about why it makes you important and special, and then talk about the systems that be a little bit vulnerable, show what you are actually not as great at, and then how you're actually working around that. For organization, you can say, I've built these systems that actually help keep me on track, and it actually makes me stronger than some other potential candidates and freelancers that you could be working with because I do this thing. Thank you so much for that question. Second question.
Yep. Any suggestions on how to avoid procrastination on projects or tasks that are repetitive or not challenging or exciting?
Yes. Yes, I have lots of recommendations for this. This is an ongoing battle you will have to figure out and trick your brain into doing. So as far as repetitive tasks, my favorite thing to do is to do two things. I like to habit stack, which is, how do I pair doing this thing that I don't really love doing with a thing that I really love doing and that I can reward myself with doing. So one of the things that I don't love as much is writing emails. Does anyone relate to that? I hate writing emails. I overthink them constantly. So every time I have to write an email that I am dreading, not because I have to send it, it's just because I have to write an email, I plan in that day to go walk my dog, which is one of my favorite things to do. Get outside, get some walking and exercising in. And then I have actually started to enjoy writing emails and get them out the door and stop overthinking them because I'm ready to get to my, let's get outside, let's get some sun, let's get some walking going. So habit stacking is the first thing I would do. And then the second thing I would do, and one of the things I don't look forward to tasks, or potentially if there's a element of rejection in that task, if I do something, and I don't know necessarily how a person is going to react to it, say I'm submitting a speaking engagement and I'm not sure if they're going to take it and I'm not sure if they're going to like the topic, I will basically procrastinate on that until I don't do it ever, unless I create a celebration with it. So this is like the habit stacking where you're like, okay, like the thing I like to do is walk my dog. For rejection, I actually create a rejection celebration. If I do a task, I know that if I get rejected by it, or so if I hear a no, this isn't really, I really just didn't enjoy the piece that you created or something like that, I actually treat myself to going out to dinner with my wife, or treat myself by spending 15 minutes reading my favorite, like a new book that I'm interested in. So how do you reward your brain for taking that chance and taking that risk? What works for you is going to be completely different than what works for me. And Rory says rewarding dull tasks equals absolutely. Yes, I completely agree. Like, how do you trick your brain and say, look, I know we don't love this. Let's do something nice for ourselves. Okay, let's go on to next question.
All right. What do you do to offset a bad day?
I love this question. What do you do to offset a bad day? I think the crux of this question is to give yourself grace, because your bad day is possibly better than someone else's day, like good day. I think that we all hold ourselves up to an incredibly high standard, and we want to be able to do so many things all the time. And if you had a bad day, you had a bad day. And talking to yourself and being able to appreciate that you had that bad day and feel those feelings and go through it and then come back at it better than ever the next day is so important. So if any piece of advice, it would be to give yourself grace. You understood you had a bad day. Start to think about why you had a bad day. Is there something you can do in the future to prevent it? Is there a new system that you can set up, you can try, you can experiment with and see if it works? Try new things, learn from things, but also give yourself as much grace as possible. And remember, you are not broken. You just need the systems that work for you.
All right. Our next question is there a support group for neurodivergent designers, and are you a part of one?
Yes, no, none that I've found yet. And that was one of the things when I was diagnosed. I looked for communities out there. I wanted to be part of communities that were successful people out there that were professionals, and I wanted to learn from them and understand where what could I hear and feel like part of that community. So I didn't find that myself. So I started to build that. I have been hosting a lot of neurodivergent communities and events and things like that. And right now, RGD is supporting this community. And in this webinar chat, there is community there for you. So get like when you are going and trying to find these people, I have found really a lot of success with what communities am I currently a part of. I'm part of a queer community as well. And I reached out to them and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a neurodivergent webinar? And they said, yes, absolutely. You're part of a creative community with RGD. Look in there, see if there's a subsection for you. I also have blindly reached out to people on LinkedIn and have had really amazing success. I found a lot of really good friends on LinkedIn for people that are actively representing themselves as neurodivergent on LinkedIn. So definitely, I'm not part of a formal one. I'm starting to create community spaces for that. And if you're looking for that, they're out there. It's just a little hidden. So yeah. Oh, and I'll talk a little bit more. I'll have a link at the end of our talk that has all the events coming up so that you can sign up for it. They'll be coming in a second.
All right. I think that's all the questions that were submitted. So we can take some of the questions that were sent in right now. So the first one is, I was excited to see the mention of grief in your bio and your mention of burnout verbally, because those are both things I've struggled with a lot recently. I would love to hear any tips you have on managing those two things in the workplace when it feels you can't get yourself out of either.
And I'm sorry, can you repeat that first part of the question? I heard the second part was burnout, but what was the first part?
Grief. Mention of grief in
Grief.
your bio.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Definitely a part of my heart goes out to you there. I think when, and I hate to say it because it's fluffy, but giving yourself the grace that you are a human and that there are going to be, like, this is going back to those bad days. There's going to be a lot of bad days. And looking at, instead of giving yourself the negative self-talk of, I just can't do anything right, or I can't get this done. Like I'm having like the worst day ever because my brain is just not working for me. It took a very long time and really hard practice to be able to talk to myself in a nice way and to think about myself in a nice way. And I think that one of the little tools that I used was writing down a mantra and putting it on my monitor so that I am reminded every day that I am worthwhile, because that was one of the things I struggled with grief and burnout and feeling unworthy of love and attention. So I just stuck a post-it on my screen that says worthwhile. And then on my desktop background, I am confident as being one of my mantras that I worked on. I think it's just really just being able to talk to yourself nicer and to give yourself that grace, because you've been through a lot and you've done so much and you're going to go so far, but you cannot do that with yourself as your worst enemy. Sorry, that was very long, but thank you so much for the question.
How would you deal with a manager who is very unorganized and also neurodivergent?
Yes. Okay, so I had the same exact experience happen. How would I deal with a manager that is unorganized and also neurodivergent. I had a very vulnerable conversation with them that identified and used I phrases about my work. So when I would talk about it, I'm not blaming them for being unorganized. I'm not trying to say, you're the reason I'm being driven crazy every day. No, it's more about understanding their perspective and how it's affecting the things that I'm doing. So having that vulnerable conversation, if you feel psychologically safe to do so, is a great place to start. I was in a really great space and I was able to do that with them. And we both agreed on certain practices that we could keep in place that would help us to both keep organized and keep together. And then the other side of things is that I would overcompensate a little bit, because one of the things as a direct report, you're going to want to make your manager look good to other people. And the way that I do that is by every week having an ongoing document of all of the things that I have done this week and the things that I'm planning to do next week and the learnings that I had from them. And that document actually helped keep my manager a lot more organized. And we would meet weekly to go over that document and say, okay, these are the things I've worked on this week. These are the things I'm working on next week. Are these the ones that are aligned with what your manager is telling you to do and what I want to have happen? So two things: having that vulnerable conversation about how you best work, that how to work with me guide really helps. And then that second thing is keeping an ongoing tally of the things that you're working through and working on, and then making sure to check in with them and say, okay, is this the right perspective? Is this the right direction to go in? And it helps to keep them more organized. So I definitely feel for you. I've had that experience as well. So good luck with that.
All right. How do you bring yourself back to the big picture? Should I set a recurring reminder to take a step back, or make a thesis statement to recite to myself every time I finish a break? I need to be more efficient to have a flow that is sustainable and profitable.
That's interesting. So the question is, how do I bring myself to the big picture to pull
Yeah.
myself out of small details? Okay, I do have a recommendation for this. I tend to obsess over details when I specifically have too much time. And if I haven't time blocked myself, I will tweak and go into smallest details and things that no one would ever care about or no one would ever understand or realize. So my biggest recommendation for you here to get back to the bigger picture is to create urgency for yourself by giving yourself a limited amount of time. I'm going to send this email in 5 minutes. Use something like our visual timer, and this actually has a sound as well that you can turn on. And once that is done, you are done with that task. Like, you need to send that email, you need to get that out the door, because the small things that don't matter as much you'll be able to prioritize when you create that urgency and that time for yourself. And then also pair that with that reward you're giving yourself. So if you time yourself, okay, 5 minutes, got to get it out the door, no matter where it is, get it out the door. And then I get to go walk my dog, or I get to go enjoy dinner with my wife, because you are pulling yourself out into that bigger picture of ideas. I want to get back to the piece where, how do you even see that bigger picture? What is your end goal? I love the idea of being able to have it physical somewhere so that you remind yourself visually, this is what I'm working for. This is why I'm doing all these things. This is why I want to be more efficient. And I want to work harder and better and faster and stronger. So yeah, do we have time for one more question, or should we end? Oh, actually, I'm gonna jump into the next part. I'm so sorry. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I will 100% answer you. And if we missed your questions, I know there's so many questions going on. What are you taking action on? What are you going to move forward with? I want you to have this linked link tree right here that has my upcoming events, my LinkedIn. There's a contact form on there. Please reach